The Batmobile in this film, it is the sound of the Batmobile that really grabs the audience. Tell me a little bit about how you created that and perhaps, what raw elements did you comp together to build the voice of that car? And again, as long as we're talking about building the voice of the Batmobile, any sound design you do for the actual voices of the characters, or do you just, the production audio of Batman is what it is?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, other than, very basic editing and mixing of dialogue, the performances are the performances. Um, there was a pitch changer being done to Paul Dano's voice as the Riddler, because Matt had this idea that he wanted him to sound like he's using a pitch changer in his mask, kind of like almost like the 60 Minutes interviewer in the dark kind of feeling, like he's trying to hide his voice essentially. And it also gave it more of a creepy feel, which was cool. But other than that, the voices largely are just the voices. In terms of the Batmobile, there is obviously quite a bit of sound design happening with that thing. And we didn't use a shred of the actual production sound. Some of it was kind of interesting, but some of those vehicles were actually built on electric car chassis, so they didn't sound at all like what we wanted it to sound like. And there was purpose-built ones to do different shots because Matt shot so much of that practically. So those cars had to be sometimes built specifically to do certain things in certain shots. So obviously there's the wonderful moment when the Batmobile shows up for the first time in this alleyway, this dark alleyway, and it plays almost like a horror film. And the whole idea of that car was that Matt thought it would be as such that Bruce would build it to scare people. Like he built it to sound intimidating and look intimidating. That's his whole. This particular Batman operates quite a bit on fear and trying to project fear into the criminal element. And so he would have designed the car to sound as scary as possible. So building off of that idea, I played around with a lot of ideas for, what are the different elements for the car? There's this sort of jet turbine kind of thing. Which is, you see very superchargers on the car. So I thought that was justified. There was this, big rocket booster on the back of the car. And then, of course, there's the engine itself, which is this huge, double-barreled thing coming off the back of the car. And so the visual design of the car gave us all this license to put crazy sounds on the car, but we also wanted it to sound very grounded and plausible, not like so high tech that it wasn't relatable. So we tried, I wanted to try all kinds of different flavors of V8s, V10s, V12s, monster truck engines. Like we literally cut a dozen different types of engines from different manufacturers and of different types, and supercharged, turbocharged, naturally aspirated, take your pick, different displacements. And we kept coming back to this one Ford V8 naturally aspirated engine from the 70s that had this really lopey idle and this growl to it. And it just was the most distinctive and kind of angry sounding engine. And the more research we did to it, it turns out that Ford motor has a specific firing order that's a little unusual for the cylinders, which gives it a bit of a off kilter kind of rhythm, and it makes it feel less smooth than something like a Mopar V8 or like a Hellcat type engine, which we also tried. And all the cars, of course, all the various engines sounded super cool in their own way, but we were trying to find the one that felt like this car. So once we found the engine that felt like it had won the audition, then we went out and tried to find more of those to record. So we ended up out in the desert in California City Airport recording this crazy off-road racing Ford Bronco from the early 80s. And that became the main engine component of the Batmobile. But the most distinctive sound is probably the shriek that it does, the sort of turbine shriek. That's the first sound that you hear in the darkness. And it kind of sounds like a banshee cry or something. And I actually made that during quarantine when we were working. Doug and I were doing some stuff with Matt on the first trailer. And we were all in quarantine and we had lots of time on our hands. So I was experimenting just, with trying to make some weird stuff for that. And I found this one very short sound of a bottle rocket. And it was just a little, very quick 1 second sound. But it had this really gnarly distortion on it. Like I think it had been recorded poorly, but somehow it felt like kind of spine tingling and weird. And I thought, there's something to this sound. And I kept trying a bunch of different stuff, and I kept coming back to this one little tiny bottle rocket. And I was like, how can I take this feeling of this 1 second little sound and stretch it out to feel like this, giant car? And so I stumbled on a piece of software called Paul Stretch, which is something that I remembered from years ago. Someone on YouTube had used to stretch out a Justin Bieber song by like 800%. And it turned it into this like crazy soundscape. And so I tracked that software down. It was like some command line thing on the internet, and I ran it into that software, and it gave me back a version that was like 100 times longer. And then I tried one that was 200 times longer, and I built all these different versions of it, and then I cobbled them together in various ways so that it would have the kind of dynamic that I wanted it to have, because I wanted it to kind of go boo, like it had to sort of start fast but then rise slowly. And so that sound, which is kind of the distinctive sound of the Batmobile, is actually a bottle rocket.
So that was a very rich, detailed answer. The takeaway is going to be that the Batmobile is a Ford Bronco with a bottle rocket.
Bingo.
Which is awesome. The appearance of the Batmobile also heralds the beginning of one of the biggest set pieces in the film, which is the car chase between Batman and Oz, or the Penguin, if you will. For the picture guys, how did that scene evolve in the editing room from possibly just storyboards or previs up until what we saw on the screen? Bill, I seem to recall you said that was one of the things that that Matt worked on during the pandemic. Tell me about the evolution of that scene for you guys. Did you both work on it?
Well, there was storyboard and there was previs early on in the picture. So, and we shot that over such a long period of time. It's one of the pieces that Tyler took over, and because I just want to deal with the rest of the movie. So Tyler took that over, but I'll let Tyler speak about that. But when I talk about the fact that Matt had time on his hands, I think the Batmobile chase would not have ended up the way it is now, in the way it exists in the movie, if the pandemic had not hit. Because once we start shooting, then Matt doesn't have time to go back and rethink anything. So I think there was I don't think that the studio wanted to have, they didn't want to pay for such a huge Batmobile chase. And I think during the pandemic that somehow Matt either talked them into it, or that he actually traded something off and said, we do need this. We can't have a short Batmobile chase. We have to have a set piece here. So at which point he worked with the stunt guys, and he worked with the previs guys, and so basically and the visual effects supervisor, and ended up with this idea, this concept of what ended up being in the movie. And again, they shot for a long period of time. I'll let Tyler address some of that too.
Yeah. To your assumptions are correct. There were previs, there were storyboards, there was a lot of different things that were already put together by the time that I joined the team. But as material started coming in from the stunt team, I guess second unit or action unit, I'm not sure what specifically they were referred to as that material was coming in, I would try to slot it in where it was attempted to be slotted in. That was it was my job to kind of like go through and try to build the representation of what the previs was at that point. But then I started shooting a handful of other angles that were not representative in that, and I tried to find spots in there that they would fit. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the previs is the previs, and it's not the best representation of what that Batmobile should be. So, we had a good template to start from, but then as Matt got his claws into it, then it became something completely different. Because, you send out an action unit to get specific pieces, and sometimes that specific piece that looks great in previs doesn't look great in actual photography, or they're not able to achieve exactly what they wanted to achieve and with the practical photography. And then there's a handful of elements that were full CG that had to be incorporated later on. So it just became like an evolution of an evolution of an evolution.